you doing? All right. So, yeah, I've been a developer for a while. I was a back-end developer for a good number of years, and then recently enjoying myself working with React, building UI component libraries. And I don't know, has anybody here worked with React or built a design language? And that's awesome. Anybody got sketch skills? Because we're hiring, so I work at a bank, JP Morgan. But this isn't about what I'm doing there, because I would have to get permission to talk about that. So, all right. So, yeah. So basically, the thing is that when we're building apps and things like that, it's easy to sort of like grab things from different places, and or maybe you get some mocks from your designer, but a lot of designers, they want to think about like design systems and design languages and building blocks and things like that, you know, designer think stuff. So this is a little bit about that, but mostly about an implementation. Oh, thanks. Called Material UI, but it's based on the Material design system. So this is basically the Wikipedia definition is implementation of an API and abstraction of a design language. So here is a typical catalog of components that you would see, you know, across maybe a company, business. So it could be a lot of variation. And a lot of companies, they want to protect their brand, and they want everything to kind of look cohesive and similar and things like that. So that's where design languages come in. They incorporate rules, their composition of building blocks, and the example we're going to talk about is material design. There's some benefits. You've got brand, recognizability, users. They get a familiar experience. Reduce cognitive friction. That's a really cool UX term that I learned. It's pretty fun. Business, you know, you get some efficiency, stability, kind of, you can convey your innovation. Say, hey, you know, we're building all this cool stuff, and it doesn't look like it was just cobbled together, even though that's what I like to do. All right, so yeah, so material design, it's really a flexible design system. It's not really geared towards any one design language. It's not really like Android-y, but it incorporates a lot of things like colors and fonts and things like that, and motion design, which is actually pretty hard. So a lot of things kind of look Android-y that are implemented on top of material design implementations. So, well, yeah, I guess this guy's dead. Material is a metaphor, and you know, it uses, well, great, bold fonts and, thanks.
Point it more at yourself, not like that.
All right, cool. Yeah, thanks. Yeah. So there's other design languages out there. Alibaba's got Ant Design, Auth0's got Style Guide. Atlassian has their own design language. It's called Atlassian Design. Segment has this one called Evergreen, and that's gaining some traction. But none of these are really very complete compared to Material. Like Material has a lot of specs. Like it has grids, it has, you know, app headers, it has typography, all kinds of things. And a lot of these other design systems are just kind of getting off the ground. So that's where Material UI comes in. Material UI's implementation implements Google's Material Design, implemented React, and it's driven by this guy, Olivier Tassinari. Look at that contributions. Wouldn't you like to have a contributions chart like that? That's freaking sick. Yeah, the guy doesn't take vacations. I think there's like 2 days he has where he didn't commit anything. I don't know, maybe, you know, got married or something. All right, and then so a lot of people ask me that, you know, these, when I'm building component libraries and whatnot, like, hey, why React? And, you know, or why would they, you know, implement this in React and not Angular or Ember or whatever their favorite API is? And when you're building things with a lot of DOM elements, I think really React is like the fastest game in town, and it kind of makes sense. It may not be the most intuitive thing to learn, and, you know, like it's got some sharp edges and whatnot, but it has a lot of features that really other libraries haven't had a chance to even catch up to. You know, there's a lot of engineering muscle, like this guy here. Probably know who that is. And then you got code splitting, like for offline experience, suspense. So like if you're doing server-side rendering and whatnot, and you need to hydrate and get some things on the page before everything's loaded. Also, another thing that they're really adamant about is API surface area. This guy, Sebastian Markbage, I can't really pronounce his name, and I also didn't even spell it right, but he gave a talk back in 2014 about how they're trying to reduce API surface area and like how important that is. And then again in 2016, this guy, Cheng Lu. And then you can see from API improvements, they got beyond React 16, which is last year at Iceland, where Dan Abramoff gave this talk about new features that are coming out. And then now we've got the hooks, which is about ready to drop. And I'm not making a play on words about songs or anything. But also, you know, it's been kind of touted as like, oh, it's the best framework, yada, yada. I mean, you can decide for yourself. But there's also ways to take your React API and get it to play nice with other frameworks. Okay, so a lot of people too ask like, hey, how do I get started with React? There's two really cool ways to do it. There's Create React App that our buddy Dan did for us, which is really awesome. And then there's also Code Sandbox, which this guy, like, anybody heard of Ives Van Horn? Yeah, apparently he just wanted a code editor to use, and so like he built basically the best online IDE that there is, and yeah, look at that, pretty sick. I mean, he's just getting started, so yeah. So yeah, React has, as a component API, has a few different entry points. You have props, you have state. There's something called uncontrolled mode, where a component may have state, and you may just want it to do the right thing out of the box. There's controlled mode. There's also higher order components and render props. I think render props is coined by this guy, Michael Jackson, not the singer. So for props, that's basically the only real public-facing API that you have to external users. So that's basically the pro there. The con is, once you add a prop, it's pretty much hard to remove it unless you want to bump, have a break and change. Then there's state, and that's really the only way to change things in your component. There's also Redux, but Redux kind of like it's a top-level component that passes in things that has state. But yeah, but something at the top level has to have state. So, and the downside of state is that it's opaque. So users really can't directly manipulate it unless you're using something like Redux, but that doesn't really make sense for a component library. So what's an uncontrolled component? Uncontrolled is the state initializes and does the thing that you expect it to. Like if you have a toggle button or a tab or something like that, users are going to expect whenever they click on things that the right thing's selected by default. Then there's also, well, how do I control it? And that's exactly what this controlled API is all about. The user may set a prop like value. In this example, there's a text field. If the user puts in the value, then it forgets what state it has, so all of the helpers and labels and things like that sort of go away, and it says, hey, you're the user, you control it. Then there's another thing called higher order components. They're pretty cool. It's a way for a component to pass in props to another component, and whenever you use something like with reducer, you're basically using a higher order component pattern. The thing is, the component internals are not really transparent to the user. So, whoa, I didn't mean to leave that slide in there. All right, and then the next pattern we have is render props, which is really becoming like the, I guess, the favored way to do things. Well, maybe hooks will be the favorite way to do things, but right now, like if you want to pass in a component or pass in a function, basically a component is a function, so you can have access to all the internals of a component and pluck out what you want and let other things pass through. So like if you have a really complicated component like an input with labels and helpers and validators, and you don't want to blow those things out, you maybe just want to control certain aspects, well, that's kind of where render props come in, because you can be picky about what you want to take. Whoa. Okay, so one of the tricky things about building components is styling. So you have this prop called class name, which is the DOM element class. You have inline styles, which is pretty typical in like React Native. You have element attribute selectors. So like if you want to say P, body text or something like that. So you could, or P data test, blah, blah, blah. You can write selectors based on your elements or attributes, and of course name classes, and then directly via the JavaScript API. But people aren't going to love you for that. So the advantage of CSS is that it's concise, it's a DSL, it's performant. It's also kind of it's also very well known. Like almost everybody knows how to use like less or Sass, or can just start like styling stuff, right? But there's some downsides, unfortunately. One of the biggest downsides, especially when you're building component libraries or big applications or applications that have to live with other applications on the same page, is that they're global. It's disconnected like between your JavaScript and what you want to style. So you can't really pass any like runtime props to CSS. It's just written, and that's pretty much what it is. You can maybe change your class names and things like that, but you can't say, oh, hey, maybe I want to increase my border size. You have to change your class name and do other tricks. So it's also repetitive. If anybody's ever like written CSS, you pretty much have to get Sass or less or something like that to do all the repetitive stuff, right? Mix-ins and things like that. And there's a lot of those kind of things talked about in this Chris Chetto's VJuice talk, where he kind of like brings out this radical idea of CSS and JS. What's really nice about it is that now you can easily support theming, because you can define your theme like as a JavaScript object. It's got a unified styling development language, JavaScript, and you can convert your SCSS or preprocessor to a number of different CSS and JS libraries. My favorite is this one called JSS, which Material UI uses, although there's a lot of talk about this one called Emotion. But it has many benefits over other solutions, including style components. So this is a write-up that Olivier wrote on the Material UI website. So, all right, so let's check out a demo, if I can. All right. Okay. So how's that font? Is that readable? Okay, really, there's not a whole lot I wanted to show you here, but what's interesting is that you define your style as a JavaScript object, and this root thing is kind of a convention. The style is a JavaScript object, but it's passed as a context to a withstyles higher order component. And these are all imported from Material UI. Then, if you need a class name, that is actually this top-level property. And you can go ahead and put in your CSS rules, very similar to like an inline style, but actually what's happening is the GSS library is generating CSS rules for you and injecting it in the head. Now, you have full control over where it injects and all this kind of things, but basically, this is going to be a unified name, so you don't have to worry about collisions. And it basically is kind of like magic, but it's pretty cool because now you can do all your CSS stuff, but you can also do it in JavaScript. So there's also another demo, but for the sake of time, I'll just get back to the presentation. We'll get further along. So I'll show it at the end. Basically, it's like a small app using Material UI. So some of the things to be concerned about is release management. This is sort of what people are expecting these days. If you look at the Material UI release notes, you will see that actually they're using conventional commits and conventional change logs, and you can actually see changes tied to commits. So if you want to use something like patch package or whatever, and you will need to like, oh, hey, I need to take this component, 2 versions back, you can patch it. You can just grab a diff because all the changes and the commits are right here. So yeah, so some of the things that you might want to incorporate in your toolchain or commitlint, Lerna. A lot of projects are using this Lerna monorepo approach. Conventional change logs, Husky, and Danger. Danger is a really cool library that can hook into your source control system like GitHub, Bitbucket, whatever you have, and it can start to aggregate things like, hey, I've got a demo deployment here, and I've got data lint fix or build reports or performance measures, whatever you want. And you can just attach it right onto your pull request. So it kind of can amend pull requests for you, and also keep things from getting too repetitive. Other things for quality management, ESLint, Prettier, Jest. Jest has a really nice Istanbul integration for code coverage, so you kind of get that. And then right now, I haven't really used Cypress, but this guy, Kent Dodds, recommends it pretty highly. Right now, I'm basically using Puppeteer and Selenium, but my understanding is Cypress is pretty sweet. Another thing to consider when you're building component libraries is accessibility. Like almost every company is committing big time to accessibility, but it's just a huge topic. There's this WCAG 2 spec, but some of the things that, to try to get closer to WCAG compliance is just do keyboard-only navigation. Try it in the Chrome screen reader, but actually, if someone really has to use a screen reader, they're going to be using this thing called JAWS, which is like $2,000, and it only runs on IE, so that's kind of bad news for people that don't like testing on IE. And then their mobile experience is becoming an emerging standard client, but it's not there yet for the most part. People use JAWS. There's also this thing to consider: color contrast, patterns, no color mode. You might want to check your site in no color mode, but WCAG 2 has got a lot of demos and docs. The other thing that's pretty interesting is if you want to get deeper into Material UI, they have a pretty nice roadmap. They have a really nice issues page, and then they have discussions called RFCs. So if you want to see what's coming, what the breaking changes are, you just hit their issues page and look for RFCs. Also, another good way to get your head wrapped around it is to just start opening up pull requests. And they've labeled a lot of issues that someone wants to learn it is good first issue. And something to consider whenever you're working on your component libraries is look heavily at prior art. If you can find, for example, date pickers and things like that, like a lot of people might go for React dates, but maybe React dates has some issues, or like, hey, I want a list component, but maybe it needs to handle 10,000 items, so you might want to look at React Virtualize. And basically the idea is that, look for what's out there. It's probably been invented. Compare a couple libraries, and also, even if it's something simple like, hey, how do I deprecate something or whatever, chances are that problem's been solved. So that's something I learned the hard way. All right, so, and also I kept like a little references page, and as a shout out to one of my coworkers who helped me get the technical stuff right. So we'll go back to the demo real quick. Oh man, whoops, crap, sorry. Okay. Yeah, so let's start here. This is the application, and if you wanted to be in the business of, let's say this is my custom component, right? And we kind of talked a little bit about how to style your component. Well, it's really nothing more than just exposing a React component. But what you can also do is that this approach of styling components with this with styles is that you can override any key for any other component that uses the JSS API. It gets a little bit tricky whenever you're using something that a CSS and JS library that somebody else is using. Like for example, if you want to use React dates, you you won't necessarily be able to override their styles, even though they're using something very similar to JSS. It's a different library, but you can still create rules that are very specific and that would maybe override the component that you're trying to style. So that's kind of the name of the game with CSS is specificity, but at least if you have a top level class before the other classes, then you're on your way. So here's this is kind of a big example taken directly from the MUI library, but you can see they just got a lot of rules. They got the search component, they got search icon, and then if you get deeper into the component, you'll see that, and look for class names, you'll see that they're just going to be plucking it directly off this classes object, menu button, title, etc. And so basically what we're composing here is two components. We're composing an app bar and just an image grid list. So let's see if we can. And I mean, it's really like, it makes things very quick and very simple, and you can, it also supports theming, but I didn't want to get into that either because that's a pretty lengthy topic. But you can create themes. There's a component called a theme provider, and it just wraps its children using React Context API. And so you can start to like pull in like light, dark themes. You can put in things like spacing, density. So like if you need, condensed grids or expanded grids, there's a lot of things. You can basically put any kind of object you want in this theming API, and it just pipes in the context. All you have to do is just take your with styles, and it's going to pass in that theme object to that with styles component directly from the context. So you don't even have to worry about how they're connected. And they don't even have to be like necessarily like in the same DOM hierarchy. That's kind of how context works. So it's pretty cool. All right. I guess that's about it. Thanks.
Any questions? Cool. Awesome. Well, thank you, Joe. Let's give him another round of applause.